You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Well, hey, everyone. Thank you again for joining the 95 Podcast. Today is a super celebration day for us because this is our 150th episode of the podcast, and that in itself, just saying that, is kind of mind-boggling, because I remember when Austin first had the idea a couple of years ago to start a podcast. I thought, well, first of all, what is a podcast, and two, who's in the world is going to listen to it? But over time it has grown. Now we've crossed over the 30,000 download barrier, which is, that's not awesome, but it's not all horrible. So at least we have a few friends out there. It could be just my family members downloading it every week. I'm not sure, but I don't think that's the case. But thanks for joining us today. As I said, this is 150th episode, so we wanted to do something special today. We're going to unveil a new aspect of what we're doing at 95 Network. But I wanted to just get perspective today from some of our team. And so today we've got several members of the 95 Network team who are joining me on this podcast, and I have no idea what's going to happen, where it's going to go, what's going to happen with it, but we ought to have a lot of fun in the process. And I'll tell you what we're going to do. Before we even dive into that, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and just dive right into this podcast. So quick break, we'll be right back. So today I want to introduce our team that we have with us today. Kevin, why don't you take a moment, tell everybody who you are and what you do and what you do at 95.
Yeah, my name is Kevin Smith. I've been served in ministry for over 20 years. Currently on the 95 Network team, I am the guy that does all the editing and producing of the podcast. So if it doesn't sound good, you can blame me, because everything usually coming from Dale is really good. But that's my main focus. Outside of that, I get to live with my beautiful wife, Katie, and together we are raising two teenagers, which in itself can be its own group of challenges and wins and losses as you raise teenagers. So yeah, that's my weekly to-do list, if you will.
Well, if people who are watching on YouTube, you notice that Kevin's got gray hair. Well, he didn't have that 2 years ago. So anyway, all of a sudden it just kind of kicked in.
My daughter is currently politicking to get a car. So, we'll see how that goes.
God help you and upstate South Carolina. Travis Stevens, where are you at and what do you do and what do you do at 95?
Yeah, I'm in about an hour north of Nashville, Tennessee, in a small town called Westmoreland. Get to be on staff at a church here for the past 10 years. It's really neat. So for 95 Network, I've got to coach pastors and be a part of that coaching process. And then also get to be a part of a growing church and a church that's doing well. And then also work with my denomination to help churches that aren't doing so well and who need revitalization. So I get to hear from pastors in every aspect of kind of the life cycle of the church. And so it's really exciting.
Cool. Now what do you have family wise?
Yeah, a wife and two girls that are 12 and 9. Have birthdays coming up. But yeah, they're certainly getting into that middle school stage, a teenager, preteen stage. So that's going to be fun.
And I believe I saw you post some pictures of Presley at a homecoming recently.
It's actually my oldest, Layla, was at homecoming.
Oh, Layla. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Big deal for her.
Yeah. Big deal for Dad too.
Yeah.
Okay. Suzi.
Yes. Hello. I'm the newest member here with 95 Network. Dale brought me on as director of operations, and it's been a fun ride so far. So, yeah, my husband's a pastor. He's been in pastor. Oh my goodness. We've been in about 27, 28 years. And I've been in ministry and parachurch ministry and nonprofit ministry all along the way as well. So we've got a little bit of experience in that way. We've been married 28 years, and we have a 23-year-old. I had to think about that in grad school. And then we just shipped our youngest off to college just a week ago. So we are empty nesting, except We have had guests over 4 out of the last 7 nights. So I don't know if the empty nest thing is true or not.
We could, from personal experience, we can tell you that when you empty nest, you're supposed to get them out of the nest. Not add
We've
new
been
ones.
trying.
Oh my! Now we have another member of our 95 Network team, Brent Carter, who recently moved from the West Coast to sweet, sunny South Carolina. Brent, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, doing great. I'm just glad to be a part of the team. We met a number of years ago. I work at Logos Bible Software as a partnership growth executive. I pastored and worked in parachurch ministry for a little over 20 years now. And I'm the husband of a Renaissance woman with 4 kids that are, oh my, they all just had birthdays too. So let me make sure I get this right. Okay, so my oldest just turned 19. My second oldest just turned 17. My youngest boy, he just turned 14. And our youngest daughter, who has a huge gap in regards to the rest, just turned 6 this year. So home life is exceptionally busy, but I'm just great to be a part of the team. I meet with pastors all the way to major leaders, presidents of denominations. So kind of keeping my finger on the pulse of the church is what I do every day. So I'm just glad to be here.
And your wife just released a new book.
That she did.
Give Christine a little plug on the book right quick while we're here.
I will. She just released a book called Pink Theology, helping bring heavy theology into the everyday in regards to women, because women can do heavy theological lifting just as good as any man. Matter of fact, we're all called to.
We'll put a link to her book in the show notes today too. So if anybody's interested in that, we'd love for people to know about it. Jason Allison, one of the old people in the group. And I just say that because I've known you since the Unstuck days.
Yes. I have I've been around you for a while now, and I still like you.
I was gonna say you're still here.
I know that's a good sign. I get my role with 95 Network is I do vision days, and I'm actually sitting in the room that I will be doing a vision day this evening. We're going to start one with the church, so I'm actually in Virginia today doing that. And I'm also on staff at a church plant just outside of Columbus, Ohio. And we launched in the middle of the pandemic because we thought that'd be a great idea. And I'm also part-time there and part-time on staff with our denomination, kind of like Travis. My job is to support the churches within our denomination as the director of church strengthening. So do that. I've got a wonderful wife of 29 years, and I've got 2 beautiful daughters. One is 22, one is 19. The 22-year-old has 2 beautiful grandsons for me, 2.5 and 1. And so, life is good.
That's cool, man. Joseph.
Yeah, so my family and I recently just moved back to the U.S. From Honduras. Yep. We served there for about 5 years. I was our director over our operations and ministry there, oversaw a good bit of churches and worked with pastors and leaders and things like that. And God recently called us back as of March, and we are launching a multi-site campus in a rural town with a church in the upstate of South Carolina. So we're super excited about that. With 95 Network, I help with vision days and different things like that. So excited to be a part of the team. I have one wife, just one.
Good.
And
that's really good.
Yeah,
excellent work there.
I have my kids just had birthdays. So let me see if I can get it straight. I have a 9-year-old daughter, a 7-year-old son, and a 3-year-old son. So lots of fun and energy and joy in our house.
I guarantee it's wide open over there. And then our farthest away member, I believe, I don't know if South Dakota is further than Iowa or not, but John Sanders is here. John, how you doing, bro?
Hey man, good to see each and every one of you on the call, and I'm thrilled to be here as well. With 95 Network, I serve as the director of coaching and love my role there, serving pastors in that capacity. But Beyond that, I spent about 17 years as a church planter in a little rural town in South Dakota. And we, with a lot of help from God, we built a multi-site church in several different locations. And in that process, God just really gave me a heart for the church, especially the small church, and for its leaders. I love pastors, and I've spent a lot of years now podcasting and coaching and influencing pastors through some of those relationships. And right now, in addition to the work I do here with 95 Network, I'm also on staff at a church where I just get to preach about once a month. So it's a much lighter load than when I was the lead pastor and church planter. So I love that. And also have a podcast for pastors that really focuses on the financial side of things. We call it the Entree Pastors Podcast. So just a lot of work that I do with pastors. And I am a husband and father. And in the last year, officially as of yesterday, my grandson turned 1 year old. So I have a 1-year-old grandson, and I'm loving that season of life. So that's a little bit of an introduction to me.
And you left out kind of the most important part. You're also the guy that connected me with pheasant hunting, and I'll be up there in about a month. And so
this is true.
When I go pheasant hunting, it's with John, and he always puts this on the birds. And so that's cool. In fact, this year, Gina, my wife, is going to go pheasant hunting with me. And also our daughter, Hannah, is flying in from Montana to join us. And so I love outdoors and love those opportunities. And I appreciate your friendship and providing that for us. What we're going to do today is I want to just talk about kind of what we're seeing as a group, what we're seeing in the church. I don't believe the term post-pandemic is correct, because I think we're still in the throes of pandemic. Maybe we're on the backside. I don't know that we'll know that for a while. But we've been seeing, as a general rule in ministry, a lot of discouragement in leadership and ministry. And so I wanted to kind of just work through this with the team today. And I'd love to hear some, if there's any good stories, we'd love to hear those too, of things that are going well for churches and for pastors. But we also want to kind of address the need for what we're terming as soul care. One of our guests on our podcast way back at one point has an entire ministry called Soul Shepherding. And that hit a nerve, Kevin. I know specifically for you, when we had that particular podcast on it, it really caught you off guard, because it touched something in you. And so I think what I want to do is kind of talk a little bit about how, I'm trying to think of the name of the fellow we had on, very famous, and I can't think of what it is right now. But when we had that podcast and he did that breathing exercise, you called me and talked about that. And now we need to also establish the fact that though you're working out at Clemson University, you were part of a huge church staff back in the day. So kind of walk through how John's podcast he did back then, how that helped you.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I recently just stepped off serving in a staff role at a church and took a secular, job, a 9-to-5, where you're working for a company, or in my case, university. And I think as I did ministry, one of the things that I think the big C church, the American church, does really, probably across the board, does really poorly at, is supporting this. Pastors need pastors, and pastors need to be refilled. And I think as you look at, your average church attender, your average church member, this is definitely not biblical, but they still put pastors and church staff on a pedestal that they are not the normal person. And so, when you work at a church, people don't expect you to have bad days. People don't expect you to have crises in your family, or just, financial crisis. They expect you to just, walk on water like Jesus did when he was here. And I can't do that. And so I think, my personality, and you've talked about this a lot, Dale, is I don't want to let anybody down. I want to make sure that I get the job done, whatever the job or the task is. And so one of the things that, I found myself doing is running and doing and trying to achieve, but never really taking time to stop and be like, how is Kevin doing? How am I doing, outside of my job, but how am I doing as a dad? How am I doing as a husband? And most importantly, how am I doing as a follower and a son of Jesus? Because I know in my life, a lot of times the latter of those are the ones that's like, yeah, I've got that, but I need to focus on this employee that's not achieving right, or this family that's having this problem. And so, going back to that podcast, one of the things that it kind of started in me, and I've just really seen it fully come to fruition as I've stepped off staff, is the importance of just having solitude and being able to breathe and be able to, and you think breathe, you do that naturally. But, taking time to just like take a breath and slow down and enjoy it. And I don't do that very well naturally.
You never have.
No.
Yeah. Well, that particular podcast was with Bill Gautier. It was our 67th podcast. I'm going to put it in the show notes too, because I was surprised, because we did in the middle, toward the end of it, he was talking about caring for your soul and all that. And this is all pre-pandemic, guys. And so it's like, I'm not sure what he's talking about. And then he does this breathing exercise, and I'm like, oh, that's not going to work, man. It's like this, we've got this dead space on the podcast. And I'm like, oh man, people aren't going like that. And then you immediately, man, that was the greatest podcast I've ever heard. I sent it to all my friends. I'm going, hit a nerve, and some of the stuff that you just said about yourself now, I don't know that you would have said about yourself back then. And so I think that's kind of the state of where pastors are right now, or at least that's what I'm seeing. Travis, as you work with lots of pastors across, probably especially the middle part of the country, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I'm seeing just a ton of, it's a couple of different things. So I get to coach a group of pastors, do some revitalization coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so that group of pastors, I feel like there's some positivity now. No doubt that they have their own sort of issues, and they've had hard times. And I mean, they're in difficult situations too, but because of the community that they formed together, there's hope there.
Yeah.
And so I see good things coming from that, but I also step into, these associational meetings where I may go speak, or may just show up and, try to build some relationships with. And I see just a hopelessness and a defeatedness. And,
do you think that's because of the pandemic, or was it already there before?
No, I think the pandemic certainly made it a lot worse for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I don't know if this is everybody within, for us anyways, I think there's a lot of posturing that goes on within pastors of like, hey, I have it together. And, even if their churches aren't growing or whatever, they can generally like figure out something to brag about or talk about and say, yeah, we're doing this well and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I just think pastors just weren't comfortable being real with one another and just saying like, hey, we're struggling here and we're struggling here. And then the pandemic happened, and they still don't know really how to open up, or if it's safe to open up, or how to talk about it. And so anytime that I try to come and speak at something like that, like I try to break the ice with just saying, I'm not doing well. Like I haven't done well in the season.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've done things badly. I've gotten to a spot where I'm just going through the motions. Like I'm not, my spirit's not really in it. And I said, and just to try to relate, and just to try to like get them to put their guard down, that they're like, oh yeah, that's what I'm feeling too. And maybe if somebody who's come to speak or whatever, if they're comfortable enough with saying, like, this is the real me, like this is me, maybe they'll be more comfortable sharing what's really going on in their lives too.
Wow.
And so that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. Jason, you work with Converge Mid-Atlantic. So that's part of a large group of churches. I guess is it a denomination?
Yeah, I think
it's sort of.
Yeah.
Well, so kind of, the same kind of thing for you, because you're working with so many different churches. What do you see?
I think what I'm seeing is a lot of pastors and church leaders are tired, and they've just been going, trying to keep everything afloat, making decisions that they just, no one prepared you to make these type of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just getting tired. But the plus side of this, I'm seeing pastors get help. At the place I'm at today, we were sitting last night on his patio, and he told me he had already connected with the Full Strength Network, that I know you did a podcast with them, and he's already connected with them, and they've already got him and his wife connected in these counseling relationships, coaching relationships that is extremely affordable. And it's just been wonderful, for him. So I'm talked to several other pastors in our network that, yes, they're tired. Yes, they struggle, and yes, things are hard, but I think they're actually starting to seek help. And that's been refreshing because of some of the connections through 95 Network, I actually have resources to offer them. And that's been really cool.
Brent, you work with churches all over the country, and you even work with denominational leaders. What's the vibe for what you've been experiencing?
I think one of the vibes that I've been seeing that is very, very fascinating and very, very challenging for a lot of churches is here in the secular. You see, during the pandemic, you've had a lot of people that have kind of felt this freedom to go work or be where they want to be. Mm-hmm. That just really sprang up. And I think a lot of pastors are coming to this place as well. Recently, I just found out that a good buddy of mine pastors a small church in Washington State. The church feels caught off guard, but a lot of us would have seen it coming, to where he just said, you know what? I want to be healthy again. I want to wake up in the morning and be excited about what the church is doing. So I'm quitting. I'm leaving as the pastor.
Oh, no.
Loves the Lord, loves his church, but the pandemic really put him in a position to re-examine his call as a leader. And I think one of the things that we're noticing from a larger scale is there are a lot of churches that have been leaderless for years, but now they don't have the body that's sitting in the role anymore.
Yeah.
So now we have a lot of churches, and I'll say this, one of the things that has been I think both a positive and a negative that comes from the pandemic is it's made everybody vocal.
That's the truth.
It's made everybody vocal, right?
Yeah.
So here, a lot of pastors, things that they might have known were being said within their church. Those things were no longer kind of hidden under the sheets, and they were vocalized. Well, now I feel like pastors are starting to vocalize things now about, you know what, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and I think there are those. I was meeting with a pastor of a fairly large church, to where they're leaning in, and part of leaning in regards to what the pandemic has caused has really forced their church to actually huddle and come together. And I mean, and we're talking about, a church that has 6 different campuses, a fairly large attendance. Yeah. They're actually leaning in, and part of leaning in isn't just using the typical church language to make us all feel better, that, hey, we're leaning in, but actually saying leaning in means that we're seeking counseling. Leaning in means that everybody is getting sabbaticals on the calendar. Leaning in means, hey, this is what it means to be a supportive church member, not you just showing up, not you just criticizing the leadership, but this is what it looks like. So I'm seeing those things. But I think one thing that I'm really fascinated by, and I'll be quiet here soon, is amongst those leaderless churches now, those that were kind of functioning as the shadow leaders of the church are being thrust up, because as the pastor was exposed, so were they. And now they're really faced with, not only did our pastor not want to pastor this church anymore, but how are we going to find a pastor right now that wants to come into this unhealthy situation?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Interesting. Really interesting. John, you have your finger kind of on the pulse of the national vibe too. I want you to share that. And one of the things I want to do is, you and Les have started a new thing called Entree Pastors. I'm going to talk more about that in the second half of the podcast as we talk about some solutions. But what are you seeing too, John? What are you feeling as you work with churches?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to give this word of hope because then I'm going to say something that's not going to sound as hopeful. But I know that the future of the church is in very good hands. It belongs to Jesus, and the best days of the church are still in front of us. I genuinely believe that. And I know that I'm not the only one who knows that. I know there are many pastors out there who would concur and genuinely feel like I'm excited about what the future holds. Mm-hmm. However, having said that, I agree with something that maybe it was Travis that said earlier. This isn't a COVID thing. I mean, COVID certainly was a difficult season for pastors for many reasons. And I definitely think it expedited a much deeper issue. Some things that were already below the surface that were there, and COVID just magnified it and expedited and took us to the end result sooner. But here it is. If you were to ask me what I think is one of the biggest problems, is something about the model that we have built in the Western church has been extremely unhealthy, especially for pastors, as evidenced by the thousands who were leaving ministry by the month before COVID ever became a thing, and burning out with unrealistic expectations and low pay and overworking and being completely consumed with their identity being wrapped up in this, identity of being a pastor. And none of that was healthy, or so much of that was unhealthy. And then add a pandemic on top of that, and the church did not fare. The model of the church that we had built did not fare very well in COVID. And as others on the call are starting to have already said, pastors are starting to wake up and realize there's got to be a better way. There has to be a better, healthier, different way. I don't know that we've entirely figured that out. I'm certainly not going to claim that I have the answers for that, but I know this deep in my gut, that the church of the future is going to look very different than the church that you and I grew up in, Dale. And again, I think that's a good thing. That's going to come with a sense of loss for a lot of people, because some of the structures that they've, that have been comfortable for them, and the things that we have come to like about church, they're going away, and they're going to change, and they're going to look different. But Jesus isn't going away. His people aren't going away. The hope of salvation isn't going away. But I think you're going to see the church figuring out, what does it look like to really get back on mission? And what do we need to take with us into the future? And what of a lot of this excess weight that we're carrying can we drop? And I think pastors are starting to kind of see that and, look for those things. And so I'm having conversations with pastors that are helping them rethink, who cares if your calling looks very different than what you thought it was going to look like, or what you were told in seminary it was going to be. Let's set you up to go serve God and to serve other people. And by the way, maybe actually make a few dollars while you do it, and not starve in the process. How about that? So that's kind of what we focus on with Entre Pastors.
Yeah, I want to dive back into that again in a few minutes. But I wanted to, Suzi, come and saving you and Joseph for the last of this intro part, because both of you have a different perspective, I think, than everybody else. One, Joseph, you just came back into the country, and so you went, were serving for a missionary for many years there, and so you had that perspective. Now you're back in the U.S. But before we get to you, Suzi, what just recently happened at your church?
I feel like what hasn't happened. So my husband and I took a break. We were on vacation, and while on vacation, we got word that our church had burned down, completely destroying it. So it was, and right before that, which I want to tell everyone, just be careful what you pray for, because right before that, my husband and I had been praying. We were coming to a point where we thought, do we need to think about a transition? So we were just praying that God would show us what was next, like God revealed to us, what's next and what's next for the church. And so lo and behold, it burns down. Now, before
lightning struck the building,
right? Yeah, lightning.
Struck
I want to make sure no one thinks that anything untoward happened.
That your husband burnt the church down. I didn't want that.
My husband
did
not burn the church down. Yeah. So lightning hit the church in a freak storm, and it burned down. And what's interesting is we've had lots of support from other pastors, but secretly the pastors do tell us that they wish it had been their church, which shows something about hurting pastors out there, that they think that maybe this would be a quick solution. Thankfully, of course, no one was hurt. It was in the middle of the night with no one there, but it was, we talk about the pandemic, and it was a sifting. It was a sifting of people who were on the fence, and, it just showed where their loyalties really lied about how much they wanted to keep being part of a church community. We live in an area that the pandemic caused a lot of lockdowns and a lot of opinions about, if you do meet or not meet. So that was a sifting. A new sifting has happened with the church burning down. You actually find out who's with you and who is not, because the circumstances are uncomfortable. We've been meeting at a church on Saturday nights that is not conducive for some of our people. But the good news is we have a location where we get to meet on Sunday morning, and I think God is up to something here. And because of two things. First of all, Tom and I have a background with church planting as well, because of a ministry we've been a part of for quite some time. And so we do have knowledge of that, working with pastors through that. Secondly, we are in a situation where we are planting a church. And I wouldn't have thought us to be church planters, just supporters of church planters, but here it comes.
Yep.
We are meeting in a building location that's right at the heart of the University of Iowa. So it's college students everywhere. And so it is truly a new opportunity to completely rebrand the church, which is a good thing, but you do find out who's with you, who's not. And the stress of my seat in being a spouse of a pastor who has been burnt out, got through the pandemic, but didn't have a Sabbath rest necessarily through that, not from the church's perspective. I think if, pastors do approach their churches about a Sabbath rest, the churches will listen for the most part, but a lot of pastors don't ask for it. If the church doesn't offer it, a lot of pastors feel like they cannot ask for it, especially if the church is going through some tough times.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the best time to ask for a break, a rest, to retool, to reach out and get coaching, counseling, whatever it takes. And our church has been able to do that for my husband. What someone mentioned before is that this is actually causing pastors to finally come out and get help.
Yeah.
I can say that about my husband too. Because of all of this and the church burning down, he has set up coaching. We have a consultant coming in with the church. He is taking a Sabbath rest here coming up in the mid-September through mid-October.
Awesome.
And this has all come about because so that's a praise. But yeah, the sifting is going on, but pastors need to just come out and say, hey, I need help, and help will be there.
So you guys are literally on vacation and you get a call,
Yes.
lightning struck and burned the building to the ground. And you were
Yes.
y'all were already fried emotionally. So it's really
we were
good
fried emotionally.
It's good to hear that you're
Yeah.
moving in that direction, because this is, I'm assuming most of our listeners, their church hasn't burnt down. In fact, I'm thinking some of the guys are thinking, well, maybe this will help. I'm like, no, you don't go burn your church down. But anyway, Joseph, I want to kind of get your perspective. How long were you in Honduras?
Close to 5 years.
So y'all were in Honduras serving as missionaries. You would come back to the U.S., raise support, and then you and the family lived in Honduras, and then the Lord's opened the door for you to come back. What's it been like for you? Because you're going from the Honduras perspective to the American perspective, and then COVID on top of that.
Yeah, it's been interesting, Dale, because you go from a place that has zero resources. I was having a conversation with a guy the other day, and our operational budget for our church plant in Honduras, for the entire year was only $10,000, and that was paying a full-time pastor and a part-time pastor, not paying me as the missionary, obviously, but here in our Western culture, we feel like we've got to have it all. And if we don't, then we're less than. And I think there's a lot of pastors who, we've talked about this a lot in the 95 Network, where, pastors go to the large conferences and they hear from the big names and they watch the big churches, and they want to, emulate that and copy that and duplicate that. But there's a huge discouragement with that, when they go back to their church that's not, several thousand people, and they don't have a huge bank account and all these things, and try to implement those things, and then they're discouraged or they get ran off because their leadership group or whoever,
you can say they're board members.
Yeah, they're board members. Whoever
that
has
family.
the family in the church that's running it runs them off. So I think that's something I'm noticing is just, kind of, I think even as John said it, just kind of the structure that we've built and what we, for so many years believe that church has to look like, is something that we've definitely got to be aware of. And I think in the future, I agree with John. It's probably going to look different. And, but, we know that, Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So we know that he's got a plan and a purpose of still reaching people in this world. So
this is why I wanted to have you guys on. It feels like we're all kind of understanding the vibe, but what I'm hearing from everyone is we're all sensing maybe there's a change coming. We're sensing that we all know we can't keep doing, and it's one thing to know that you can't keep doing what you've always done. It's another thing to sense that hope is coming. And I've actually, I would send out an email every week to our board of directors at 95 Network, just updating them on what happened that week. And I even said in today's email that I'm sensing this change that's coming. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break, and we come back. We're going to talk about what 95 Network has come up with that we're going to offer to help, and then get some more perspective from you guys on things that y'all may be knowing about as well to help. So take a short break. Be right back. So welcome back. We're so glad that you're joining us today. We've got our several members of the 95 Network team together today as we celebrate our 150th podcast. And with it, we wanted to use this as kind of a way to announce, and we're going to roll this out over September, October, in the fall. But one of the new things we're creating here at 95 Network is something we call Soul Care Essentials. We have sensed for a while that pastors are they're just done. I mean, and everybody on the call today knows that this has been the case as well. The effect of the pandemic and has taken a toll. One of the things that I've always said is that when you don't know what to do, you always go back to your default, because your default is familiar, it's secure, and it's pretty easy to sell that default to everybody else. And I had thought that we would see this happen, and I believe we have. I thought there would be a second wave of the effect of the pandemic on leaders in small and mid-sized churches. I don't mean that another wave of like COVID attacking everybody, even though I know it's still out there, but I'm not talking about the sickness. I'm talking about the effect of it. And what we discovered was a lot of our pastors, once they began to meet in person again, or get back into to that way we've always done church, they realized that people haven't come back. You cannot deny the fact that in every arena of life, pretty much everything's come back except one arena, and that's the church. And I think it's because we weren't engaging very well before. And so we discovered, and one of the things that several of you have alluded to, is that all of a sudden now it's like, for the first time ever, pastors are willing to admit, hey, I need some help. I'm not well. And in sometimes I don't think they even knew they weren't well. They were just always so busy doing life, they didn't have time to realize they weren't well. So we've launched a new aspect of 95 Network. We have not canned what we were doing. We still love, everything about our coaching and consulting processes, our conferences, the strategic planning, the connecting with it. But we just felt like we needed to spend a season on what we call Soul Care Essentials. And so if you have just heard this today, if you go to the website, we actually have a survey. If you'll click on the pop-up box on the very first page at 95network.org, it'll walk you through this process that we've called. But we're also launching a new conference. One of our new conferences is called Soul Care Essentials. And we're going to do 3 sessions, and then we're going to break for lunch, and it's over. Now, after the lunch, we're going to hang around and pray for people if they would like to do that. But we're going to spend some time, first of all, just talking about your private life. Session 1 is all about your private life and what you're dealing with emotionally, what's happening inside of you. The second session is, we're calling it your personal life, and that's you're leading your family, how you're doing with your parenting, with your, a lot of pastors, spouses feel like the ministry is the paramour, if you will, and how you doing. And then the last session is on your professional life, and there's some pretty radical ideas, which include with John, what John and the guys are doing with Entre Pastors, that we feel like are some things that are coming. As we kind of work through the Soul Care Essentials piece, Jason, just for a moment there, what do you see? Or do you see that pastors are open and receptive to receiving help right now? Or are they still kind of looking at it like a calf at a new stall gate?
Okay, that's an analogy I'm not real familiar with.
I thought I would pass that along to you, because since you're in Ohio, you would know what that means from the guy from South Carolina.
Look, I was born and raised in South Carolina. I've never heard that before.
Okay, good.
You weren't on a farm anyways.
No, but anyway, go ahead. I apologize. It's new to me.
Well, Dale, actually, I do sense that pastors are open to beginning to talk about some of these things. beginning to acknowledge, hey, you know what, we have experienced vulnerability over the last 2.5 years. And for a lot of pastors, that just scared the heebie-jeebies out of them. They don't like to be vulnerable. They like to be in control. They like to predict. They like to know what's going to happen. And so all of a sudden, all of that got pulled out from under them. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of coming back to saying, okay, I can't go back to that. Mm-hmm. It's pretty obvious looking around. There's no way I can keep doing that. Mm-hmm. And I'm not equipped to whatever's next. I don't have the tools in my toolbox to handle this. I'm going to need some help. And especially when it comes to just even the personal side of things. Yep. It's there. We're pastors. We're like professional Christians. And so we were always like really good at being Christian because our job's dependent on it. But we kind of reached a point where being a Christian and being a pastor didn't necessarily go hand in hand for a while. And it exposed us for the lack of, fullness in our life. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden we're like, oh, we need to get full again. I think it was you in a staff call or something we had a while back. You said something to the effect of, we're reaching a point where it's not so much that we have a bunch of empty pulpits, but we've got a bunch of empty preachers in pulpits. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm seeing. And they're seeing it. And they're saying, okay, that's not going to work. We got to fix this.
We actually been there for a long time. It's just, again, we've hindered, and honestly, I haven't used this terminology today on this particular podcast, but I honestly believe we're in the throes of a reformation. I believe we're in the midst of a reformation that will be looked back on, that will be to the level of the Luther Reformation. We may not be, nailing something to the door, but the Lord's doing something in our hearts. Kevin, I want to dive into something. I don't want you to go anywhere you don't want to go. But I know that one of the things you've done is you've connected with Full Street Network, and you've actually been doing some counseling with them. Without getting too personal, kind of walk through anything you could share with us about, first of all, why you reached out for that, and then how it's helping.
Absolutely. I don't mind sharing this at all. I think when I stepped away from doing full-time ministry, I realized that over my professional ministry career, I'd never taught anybody in a profession. Like I had buds and I had mentors and I had friends that I would talk to or gripe to, whatever the case may be. But I never had somebody that was completely unplugged from my world, just knew me from a Zoom meeting that I could just talk to and I could get his perspective. So the place I left, they gave me several sessions of counseling. I took advantage of it and was able to just sit down and talk to this guy over a video chat. And, going into it, I was like, man, is video going to work? Like I'm trying to, bare my soul, if you will, to this guy over a Zoom chat. But one of the things he really helped me see is the importance of solitude. And I think, I mentioned that when we first started talking, is I always looked at solitude by its second definition, which is being deserted, being on a deserted island, being, abandoned, because that's solitude. You are, Tom Hanks talking to a volleyball on an island. But there's another definition, and I think that's the just being quiet. And I would even brag about from where I lived to where my office was, and I worked for the church, was about 30 minutes. And I would use the term, I have redeemed this time by listening to the word or listening to a podcast, listening to worship music. And that was great. But what I need to do a lot of times is just be quiet. And so now, I feel like I've gotten closer to the Lord as I've stepped off staff from a church. I told Dale a few weeks ago, reading the Bible is actually just reading the Bible. It's not prepping for a meeting or prepping for a message I've got to give or checking a box because I work for a church, but I'm just opening God's word, and I don't have to do it, air quotes, for my job. It's because I want to do it. And driving to the office where I work now at Clemson, and sometimes, probably twice a week, I just turn the radio off and just drive 30 minutes to work and don't say a word, don't have phone calls, don't listen to podcasts. And man, sometimes Lord says something to me that's like really encouraging or really, I needed to hear. Other times it's just enjoying the silence. I'd imagine most people don't have 30 minutes in their day where there's not something playing or an activity or something going on of just silence. And that time has been really, really healthy for me, spiritually, emotionally. Just be able just to enjoy that and drive to work and get there. It's like, oh man, I feel so refreshed. And I just had car noise for 30 minutes.
Well, you and I have been together for almost 30 years, and I've never known you to be as healthy as you are today. And which is, it's kind of sad in a sense, because, you know, you've been in ministry. You used to be my youth pastor, but to see what God's done in you in the last few months and the conversations that we've had and what you've learned in the counseling process. So, and I wanted you, hopefully, and I was glad you shared what you did, because I wanted you to share that, because I want our pastors to understand it's not wrong. It's not weakness. It's not, you're not messed up if you need to get help. And go listen to my podcast from last year when I almost drowned.
Go ahead. I think one of the things that I saw leaving the ministry profession, or leaving full-time ministry as a job, was that the world, if you went work for Google or some corporation years ago, they understood the importance of mental health. And they would have, mental health days where you could you're not sick, you don't have a cold, you don't have COVID, you don't have the flu, but you're just going home, stay home to have a mental health day, just to mentally be healthy. And for many, many years, the church didn't do that, or at least the churches I work for didn't have that.
Don't we just need to pray about it?
Pray and fast, guys, I guess. But, but I think, stepping away from the church, like, I truly see the importance of soul care and mental health as equally as important as, getting a shot or going to the gym or having a quiet time. Just being able to be healthy in who you are, be healthy mentally, and that will lead to being healthy spiritually.
That's so good. John, I want to spend a little bit of time on Entre Pastors and on the focus of what you're doing, because you and I have talked about this, and I think this is just obvious as we talk about the church changing moving forward. It's very possible that we will actually move to a place where more pastors are bivocational than full-time if things keep trending the way they do. So kind of dive in for a few minutes about what you guys are doing, why you're doing it, and what you're seeing.
Yeah, well, I'll try and keep it fairly brief, and you can hit me with more questions if you want. But I earlier, Dale, you mentioned the word radical, that it's a radical concept, and I just wanted to make a quick statement about that. It's really not that radical that pastors are bivocational or working additional jobs so that they can afford to be a pastor. I think the radical thing about what we're doing is saying we're done with that narrative of the starving pastor, that a pastor has to go work another job so that the church can expect them to go, get their needs met somewhere else financially, and then be able to come and serve us full time, and jump through all of our expectations. What we are really celebrating is pastors that are getting out in the marketplace and doing something entrepreneurial. I mean, certainly we have a track to help pastors, that maybe just want to work for someone else. Maybe not everybody wants to run their own business, but where we see pastors getting out in the marketplace and doing their own business entrepreneurially, and being able to celebrate that, being able to celebrate the fact that I'm doing okay financially, like we're winning, we're doing well, we're not living paycheck to paycheck, we're not skimping by trying to figure out how we're going to make ends meet. We're creating goods or products or services in the marketplace, and people are rewarding us well with, their thank you certificates, as Dave Ramsey calls them, $100 bills. And in the process, here's something really exciting about that, Dale. Turns out there's a lot of unsaved people out in that marketplace.
How about that?
Turns out when we get pastors out of this professional role that we've developed, where they're full-time employees of a church sitting in an office. And I'm not knocking that model. I've been there, done that, have the t-shirt from it. It's not a very nice t-shirt because the bunny wasn't very good, but so I understand where we inherited that model, right? We saw it modeled, it was given to us, we never questioned it. So I don't want to make light of it for the many pastors that are there. I'm not questioning their heart or their sincerity. I'm just saying it's a really good thing when pastors actually get back out in the marketplace where there's lost people. And another thing that it does for pastors too is it forces them out of that role of being the primary ministry provider, which God's word never put that on pastors. Absolutely. Somewhere along the line of us becoming professional, leaders in the church, that this is what I do for my career, my job. Somewhere in that process, the church as a whole, kind of the body of Christ, stepped back and said, okay, that's cool, Pastor. You do the work. We'll come on Sunday and be consumers of the work that you produce. And then we'll pay you a, $40,000 salary to do the full-time work of the ministry. And we'll just sit back and watch you do your thing. And when we get pastors out in the marketplace, it forces that issue. They can't be folding bulletins and, doing all the stuff that wasn't really in their lane ever to begin with. It puts them back in that place of, I really need to equip some leaders in the body to do the work that needs to be done. Because according to Ephesians 4, it was supposed to be their job in the first place, the people, the work of services to be done by, the people of the body of Christ, not just the leaders in the church.
I love our team. I'll tell you what, the people on this call and the other, I think other 8 folks that aren't with us today, I just love the fact that we've got real people who are living real lives and doing real ministry. And it has not been, there's nobody on our team that, that's, driving around in a Rolls Royce, but nothing wrong with that, but we've all paid the dues and we want to help you. That's why we're doing the Soul Care Essentials piece. So what we're going to do to kind of wrap up today's podcast, and I'm going to do a little rapid fire with each one of you. And so all of you just go ahead and prepare yourself now. If you're sitting down with a pastor today that's discouraged and you've got, you're having a cup of coffee and you got about a minute to speak into their life, I'd like to know what you would say to them. And so give you you guys a chance to think on, and I'm just going to call on you and let you share that. I want to remind everybody, hey, look, if you would be interested in being one of our hosts for the Soul Care Essentials Conference, again, there's no cost to you to host it. We handle all the registrations. All we ask you to do is provide the place, use your influence to invite people to come, and then if you could provide lunch. And even providing lunch is a financial obligation to you. We've actually had folks who've hosted conferences who've gotten, the lunches scholarship by a local, restaurant or whatever. So, but anyway, we'd love to talk to you about that. If you'd be willing to host a conference because of your concern for your friends, your loved ones, the people you do ministry with, I'll give you more information here in the show notes about how to get involved with hosting the Soul Care Essentials. And so, Jason, I'm going to kick it off with you, and then we'll just see, if you got 1 minute, you're sitting down, you're talking to a pastor over a cup of coffee, based on the stuff we talked about today. What would you say to them to give them some encouragement or advice or some wisdom?
Well, going first means everyone's going to be better than whatever I say because they get to build on it. But, the big thing I would tell them is God knows what he's doing, and he called you into ministry, and there's a reason he has you where you are right now. And he doesn't make mistakes in that. And so I would say, lean into God and his calling in your life and listen to what he's saying, and then respond from that place, not from a place of frustration from the circumstances or anything around you, but really say, okay, God, you called me. What are you doing? And am I willing, kind of as Kevin was saying, to be quiet enough to listen?
That's so good. Suzi.
I would say schedule in time to dream with a blank canvas. Pastors often get in the rut where they are just going about their business, knowing about, okay, I need to do this for Sunday or this board meeting. But what has happened through, a church burning down is what does the dream of the future look like? Whether it's in your own personal life, your ministry, we don't take time enough to dream with a blank canvas. So that would be something I would encourage pastors to do, is schedule that time. And, my husband and I did this through a series of walking each night. And we would literally say, okay, blank canvas moment. What would you do of your life, if you weren't constrained by what we have going on right now? And it's been really powerful and has actually given us hope and some direction in that, because we break through the boundaries of the status quo. So that would be my.
Good. That's so good. Well, I just up with Kevin, I know how discouraged you were a month ago. So hearing this just really fires me up. Brent, what about you? What would you say?
You know what? I would say first, find something that God is doing in your life. It doesn't have to be at the church, but find something that God's doing that you can get excited about. And then start to build around that. Because right now it's really easy for not just pastors, but even us to kind of gather up all the negative stuff and hug it and hold on to it. Find something that God is doing and just be excited about it, regardless of how big and impossible it seems, or regardless of how small and insignificant it might seem. Get excited about it. We've said it for years that God is doing something new. Well, lo and behold, here it is.
Here it is. That's good.
So we don't have to be discouraged all the time. I'm not saying ignore it, but I am saying find something God's doing and let it bless your heart.
That's so good. Joseph.
Yeah, I think what I would say to pastors is, man, just remember you're not alone, that God is with you. As Jason said, God called you. He promises, he's not going to leave you. He's not going to forsake you. So don't forget that. But just also know you're not alone, that there's other pastors that are going through the same struggles. And don't be afraid, like Kevin said, to reach out for counseling. I've done that myself. It's huge. It can help. Also find a mentor, which is great. And I would just say, if you can, maybe there's a network in your area of pastors that are going through the same thing that you can reach out to, but also to us,
yes,
obviously. And also don't forget that one of your main ministries in your life is your family. That was one of the things that a counselor said to me once, was just take a moment and sit with your kids and play with them. Take a moment away from your phone, and engage your wife. Don't just be present by proximity, but actually be present.
That's good.
So that's what I would say.
That's so good. Travis.
Yeah, I would say stop underestimating the impact that you're already having. I think so many times that's what we're doing, and just the impact of faithfully preaching each and every week, faithfully praying for your congregation, no matter how big or small they are, building those relationships, showing up and praying for people at the hospital or at the funeral home. We have no idea, and you have no idea the impact that you are making. I heard a pastor say just recently, he said, if God would just take and pull back the curtain a little bit and let you see the impact that you're actually having, pastors, we would probably become so prideful that we wouldn't be good at anything anymore. Like we just don't realize it. And so quit being so hard on yourself. God's asked us to be faithful. And when you're faithful, God's doing incredible things through that work.
That's so good, man. Kevin.
Yep, I would say as a pastor, everything you tell your congregation, all the truths that you preach about to your people on Sunday, the love and the care and how much Jesus cares for them, and that he died for their sins, and that he wants to be your provider, and all that stuff is also true for you. And I think one of my scriptures that just kind of come alive in my life in the last few weeks is actually a Message translation, but it's Psalms 116, and it's verse 7. It says, "I said to myself, relax and rest. God has showered you with blessings." And I would say, pastor, say to yourself, relax and rest, and look at the blessings God has given you, and know that everything that you preach about Jesus is also true for you.
Last but not least, John.
Man, this has been so good, and you all have dropped just some great stuff. But Suzi wins this round, so I'm going to say something that is going to join the winning team with Suzi. Dale, a minute ago when
we're
you
so
said,
competitive.
I know when you had us think about what to say. If we just had a brief minute to talk to a pastor, here's what immediately popped into my mind: where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And pastor, I want you to know you have way more freedom to live the life God has created you for and to become the person he created you to be. And it looks so much different from one person to the next. Yes. And embrace that freedom. Your future could look very different than what your past has looked like. And it doesn't mean you're disobeying your calling, or, Gladys might be disappointed in your church, but God hasn't called you to follow Gladys. He's called you to follow Jesus. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. So dream, do what Suzi said, dream with a blank canvas. What would it look like? What does God put in my heart? And let's go do that thing. And I promise ministry will happen along that journey. It will. I promise the church will grow and that the body of Christ will build and the gospel will go forth. So just embrace the freedom and let's get excited about what lies in front of us.
What a phenomenal podcast. Guys, I hope today you sense it. I just sense the presence of the Lord stirring hope in the church. Before you're going to have great faith is the substance of what you hoped for. And today, if anything could happen in this podcast, hopefully we can at least give you hope. And if you're at a place where you need help, please reach out to 95 Network or someone, Full Strength Network, anybody. If you can help us by bringing in the Soul Care Essentials Conference, I am anticipating the Lord doing massive things in the hearts and lives of people. The Church of Jesus Christ is alive and well. I've said for a while now, the church in America has had cancer, but the Lord's healing that. And we get to be part of that. And so thank you. First of all, thank you for being on our team today. All of you who are part of this call. God has just so blessed 95 Network with such a great team of people. And it's just an honor to be with you guys. Thank you for your heart for the church and your love for Jesus. And then to all the listeners today, please share this podcast. Please help get it out there today. We're not trying to grow our name or whatever, but there are people who need to hear something that was dropped in this podcast today in ministry. And folks, we're excited about what's coming. Again, check out the Soul Care Essentials. We're excited about dropping that. All the details will be here in your show notes. And team, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to be here today. Man, I appreciate all of you. And I just want to thank you all for being part of this. Y'all can say something because you're shaking your heads. That doesn't. You can say, yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Yeah, I got a bunch of tech people here for sure. Well, God bless you. Thank you, guys, and look forward to our next podcast next week. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.